Today we're going to be talking about infused beverages. So we're going to start off by letting everyone introduce themselves, tell us what company that you're with and what part of the sector, is kind of your area of expertise. Why don't we start with you, Chris?
Thank you so much. I'm Chris Bunka. I'm the CEO of Lexaria Bioscience, traded here, of course, in Canada as well as in the United States. We are a biotech company, and we have a very broad portfolio of patents, both issued and pending, all over the world. Most proud, most recently, of our 2 medical patents that were just issued this summer for medical applications with cannabinoids. We work with beverages and all sorts of other forms of oral and topical means of delivering cannabinoids and other drugs as well. Thank you for the wine.
Is that infused?
Hey guys, I'm Paul Pederson, the co-founder and CEO of NextLeaf Solutions. We trade as oils on the CSE. Our focus the last 2.5 years has been developing disruptive intellectual property around the industrial scale extraction and purification of cannabinoids. We really view THC and CBD as ingredients for things like infused beverages and edibles, which all these 2.0 products that become legal across Canada next month, and I think for us, very focused on now commercializing our IP portfolio through B2B, toll processing, and white label. Our vision as a company is to really lead the industry in a cost per milligram by being innovative and focusing on large scale throughput of low quality biomass into these standardized molecules. So looking forward to chatting about infused beverages today.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Emma Andrews. I'm the Chief Commercialization Officer at BevCanna Enterprises. We're traded on the CSE under the symbol BEV. We have multiple revenue streams, including our own house brands and white labeling services for other licensed entities. We have a 40,000 square foot manufacturing facility out of the interior BC near Osoyoos. And this is going to be the site for infused beverage production for a portfolio of brands that BevCanna will be launching over 2020. And they're all making use of a spring water aquifer that's on site. It's 315 acres of agricultural land reserve, where we'll also be outdoor cultivating sun-grown organic cannabis that'll be infused into our beverages. And we work with NextLeaf actually as our technology provider for water-soluble cannabinoids that get infused into our portfolio of beverages. I like to say I have the funnest job in the industry too, because I get to work on everything from product formulation through to go-to-market strategy. So it's really, really a dream job. So pleasure to be here and share our insights today.
Hello? Okay, that's working. All right, I'm Terry Donnelly. I'm the chairman and CEO of Hill Street Beverage Company. Our ticker symbol on the Toronto Venture Exchange is BEER. So we have multiple revenue streams as well. We have a 50,000 square foot cultivation space in Saskatchewan that includes 33,000 square feet of bottling and canning, processing and extraction inside the building. We currently make alcohol-free wine and beer that's distributed across about 45% of the Canadian grocery and drug stores. That's about 8,000 stores that we are in, and that's up from, when we started the brands about 20 months ago. We were in about 900 stores when we first launched. So very rapid uptake of the products across the country. And we actually work with Lexaria as our technology and infusion partners. So we have a revenue stream from the production of powder, which is a water-soluble, odorless and tasteless powder made from full-spectrum cannabis oil that we use Lexaria's technology to convert oil into powder and then sell that as an ingredient across the marketplace. And then we also produce dried flower and pre-rolls, and we'll make drink mixes and compressed tablets that are water soluble. So a range of things on top of the ready to drink wine and beer.
Thank you, Terry. I will point out that we're drinking infused wine with grapes. There is no THC in our drinks, so things aren't about to get crazy up here.
I can fix that.
So the interesting thing about how this panel has been constructed, which I think is exciting for us, is that we have everything from R&D to B2B to B2C. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of go through, a start to finish process so we can learn a little bit about this, because I'm sure all of you keep hearing infused beverage. I hear it all over the place, but let's figure out what that actually is, what some of the technology is around it, what the interest level is, what clientele is using it, what the branding restrictions are around it. So we're going to go through that. We'll go through the panel and then try and find some time in the end that we can actually get into the investment valuations around it, and what part of the sector people might want to be looking at. So Chris, why don't we start with you? Why don't you start us off at the beginning with the R&D side?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, you've got a lot of expertise up here. I mean, all of these people on this panel know a lot about beverages, and not everybody in Canada that's working in cannabis knows very much about beverages. Oil in water is hard. So that's the first thing you need to know. Cannabis molecules are oil soluble, water-based beverages are not. So you're mixing by definition oil and water, and it's really, really hard to do, or at least hard to do it well. We've been working on it for 5 years. Our original patent applications go back to 2014, and they were for using black tea as the base for insertion of cannabinoids. So we've been doing it a while. There's a lot of things that we'll probably all be talking about today, I would imagine. It's going to be things like nanotech, particle size, micelle formation, pH values, acidity values, specific gravity. All of these things matter, probably not to you if you're a consumer, but they matter a heck of a lot to all of us as we're trying to put our beverages together and make sure that they don't get cloudy, or that you have an oily, nasty ring on top, or that you have sediment dropping to the bottom. So all of those things are part of how a good cannabis beverage is going to be made. Lexaria has thought for a long time that, and it's a personal thing, so not everyone will agree, but we have always thought that if you like Chardonnay, you probably don't drink a lot of Sauvignon Blanc, or perhaps you don't like rosé, or perhaps you don't like Labatt's Blue. In other words, people's palates have refined to the point where you know what you like and you buy what you like. So I've always thought that it's really arrogant for a new company, a big LP, to say, hey, we're going to make a cannabis beverage and you're going to love it because it has cannabis inside. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't really buy that. I think people who buy version 2.0 products buy them because they want the experience of that product, and they don't necessarily want it to taste like cannabis. So we try to make technology available that doesn't necessarily impact the final product that much from a taste or an aromatic point of view, i.e. your Chardonnay should still taste like a Chardonnay, so should your Cabernet Sauv, and so on and so on. So we try to do those sorts of things so that you don't have to absorb the aromas and flavors of cannabis unless you choose to, which is very easy to do. So I think those are some of the things. I shouldn't go on.
Thanks, and I think, sorry to jump in there, but I think the very good point to that is that e-cigarettes, that you can actually buy an oil that tastes like cigarette, but nobody actually buys those. They buy all of the infused flavors. And really, again, it's a really good point on the palate that we're not necessarily wanting to taste that. Paul, maybe you can jump in further to the technology side and kind of your area, your wheelhouse.
Just to piggyback on those points, I think when you go to other jurisdictions like the United States, where cannabis beverages are legal in some states, and you buy a cross section of these products, you'll notice one thing in common: they aren't very good. They stink. The taste isn't very good. The smell isn't very good, and it takes a long time to feel the effects. And I think for infused cannabis drinks to be mainstream, they've got to taste good. They've got to be available at the right price point, but most importantly, they got to work fast. And I say this a lot, that if it took you an hour and a half or 2 hours to feel the effects of a beer and wine wouldn't be very popular today. So I think for us, we've taken the approach that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We felt like with the prohibition of cannabis, there's some fantastic technology that's already been out there. We just had to go find it. That's how we've developed our portfolio of 8 issued and 28 pending patents around the industrial scale extraction purification of cannabinoids. And now that we're looking to these downstream 2.0 products. Tomorrow we're actually going to be making a big announcement around some technology that we've been working on for the last year with a group of scientists in Ontario, with technology that we're acquiring that we are very, very excited about, because when we've tried it ourselves and kind of R&D'd the product, the technology, it's taken my onset time for about an hour and a half to kind of feel the effects of THC in a beverage down to less than 5 minutes. So when we look at this space and we say, okay, well, we've got Constellation Brands, you've got big tobacco, big alcohol, big CPG coming into this industry, they're not coming in here to grow plants. They're coming in here to be the leaders in branded products. So for us, we think there's never been a better time for companies to develop intellectual property around extraction, purification, and formulation of all these products.
I just want to jump into and put it through the lens of the consumer. Chris was mentioning this before, if consumers will actually care about the technology or just the outcome or the experience. But I think actually within the regulations that'll exist for infused products in Canada, this is the first chance technology is really going to get to shine, because it'll mean that when you read the ingredient panel, there won't be a lot of additives if you're using superior technology that don't require flavor masking or excessive sugar into the formulation, to Paul's point, to cover up an inferior extraction process or inferior technology. So whether or not they associate that, the consumer maybe not associates it back to the technology provider, they'll start to identify which products actually have superior taste profiles based on a clean ingredient panel. So, the nutritionist in me, that's my background prior to cannabis, really wants to advocate for consumers to read labels now, and for retailers in the cannabis space, regulated retailers, to really advocate for that point of education, to help differentiate product at shelf and differentiate what you'll see in the Canadian market from what you see in the US market as well.
Thanks, Emma. One thing I'd love for you to touch on, and the final point I'd love you and Terry to kind of get into, but I'd love for you to talk about potency and absorption. So maybe you can discuss kind of those two factors that are involved in the process, and as a consumer, what we need to look at.
Well, those are really important topics, and I think it's one of the things that a lot of consumers really haven't really had a chance to understand how cannabis works in your body. If you've ever had an edible from the legacy market, those methods by which they make edibles available, first of all, they do have this 90-minute, anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hour sort of time onset. And then the second thing is, when cannabis is absorbed via your liver, only about 10%, up to 10% of the actual THC that you're consuming is actually entering your bloodstream. So people think that I had a 10 milligram gummy, but really they're feeling the effect of only 1 milligram that's in their system. And so with the new technologies that are coming out, we're getting bioabsorption rates that are incredibly fast, and we're getting the bioavailability rate, the amount of THC that enters your bloodstream, being north of 90% with a lot of technologies that are coming out. So when consumers look at a 10 milligram dose in a unit, and that's a confusing thing from a Health Canada standpoint, it's 10 milligrams in a selling unit, and a selling unit could be one beer, but it could be a 6-pack of beer, right? So both of those can contain only 10 milligrams. But when you actually equate it back to alcohol consumption, and you're using the latest technology that we're getting from Lexaria, it's almost a 1-to-1 ratio, using the legal dosage of about 2 milligrams per serving, 2 to 2.5 milligrams per serving, kind of mirrors for most people the degree of intoxication you'd get from alcohol. So it's a feeling, it's an intoxication level that I think will be very familiar to consumers, and very safe and enjoyable, and allow them to kind of use the beverages in the way that they normally use alcoholic beverages, and hopefully with the formats and tastes and flavors that are going to be available to them, that we've kind of created for the first time in 10,000 years a true, safer, healthier alternative to alcohol, which I'm really excited about being part of.
I think it's interesting when you look at alcohol too. The alcohol percentage is a rough equivalent to the potency in cannabis-infused beverages, but nowhere in alcohol do you see onset time. So to your point, Terry, it's a much more reliable, predictable outcome. So I think as far as responsible consumption goes, cannabis offers a really a more accessible experience to consumers, a more predictable type of experience to consumers, because there's more metrics that they can use in reconciling what their outcome was compared to what the claims were on that package. So both potency and onset time, I think, are two really, really valuable metrics.
Yeah, no, and actually, there's another element to cannabis which makes it even more complex and hard to communicate, and that's that it's a genetic response in the consumer, not a body mass weight response. And so you have widely varying responses to the same 2 milligrams across a breadth of consumers. And what we've seen in the focus groups and testing that we've done is, that people who've never consumed cannabis have widely varying responses to those who are occasional consumers, and then those that are regular consumers, daily consumers. Even amongst that particular segment, they have widely varying responses in the degree of intoxication that they feel. But the nice thing is that sort of 1-to-1 ratio is accurate across about 75% of the consumer base, and the other 25%, it's kind of all dependent how their genetic makeup responds to cannabis. So it's a really complex market, and I think the cannabis consumer already expects these varying responses from what their own experiences have been, and certainly we hear really widely varying arrays of consumption that people have. Like some people are smoking 5 joints a day, and another person only takes one puff, and they get sort of the same level of intoxication. So, there's a huge variance that we're going to have to deal with.
Well, and I think it's important to note as well that, listen, at the end of the day, there's just tons and tons of data on the fact that there isn't dependency issues associated with cannabis as there is with, alcohol or other forms of drugs. And especially right now in this time in history, our access to pharmaceuticals is a little scary, and our dependency on pharmaceuticals. So I think this is a good movement, and I think it's an interesting time for consumers because it's fairly brand new, and the fact that, just even you describing it, the technology around it really was needed to be able even to take the product and turn it into a water-soluble product. Emma, maybe you could dive in a little bit on kind of the branding element of this, because I know that there's some Canadian regulations around it, and please, anyone else after Emma, jump in on this, but maybe talk to us a little bit about the branding side of things.
Yeah, so coming from CPG prior to cannabis, you're used to having a lot of real estate on package. It's your most crucial component to nail. Outside that, there's obviously marketing at the retail location and outside in the community and online, but in cannabis, it's highly restricted. So there's a lot more nuanced elements that will be coming to life within this product category, and that's really why I'm driving home the advantage of technology, superior technology and clean ingredients, because now more than ever, the consumer's paying attention to things on the package that you might have missed when you're drawn by, a sexy logo or unique form factors, things that'll be a little more difficult to implement within cannabis, and that's partly the packaging restrictions in terms of needing to put caution labels, THC warnings, child-proof lids, et cetera, and then also similarly within the formulation, high regulations around the type of potency that you can put in these products. So it's a very narrow niche that you're playing within. A lot of people in the industry will comment that it feels like handcuffs, and I kind of like to flip that on its head and say it's actually a framework within which we get to play. So it's the first time I've ever worked in an industry that it's such a narrowly defined opportunity space that if you can win in the eyes of a consumer, and ultimately I think taste and efficacy are going to be what a consumer's looking for that repeat purchase, you'll be able to build a category. And the first piece is getting the brand awareness out there. So certainly there's some traditional marketing tactics that brands will have to do to build their share of voice within the market. But if it doesn't taste good and it doesn't work, which we've all been kind of mentioning, you're ultimately not going to build a category around that. So I think those are the two crucial components for building brand in this space.
We say this about brands a lot, that the brand, especially in this industry where you're so restricted in even the font that you can put on your packaging, that your brand, it really comes back to what's inside your bottle. And I think what this industry has seen over the last 5 years is that what's been legal has been dried flower and this low-dosed cannabis oil. Generally, large producers have really struggled on quality. And I say that this industry is just getting started, because all the mass market forms of cannabis don't become legal until next month, and I think with how restricted you are compared to alcohol, I mean it's really outrageous when you think that alcohol killed 14,000 Canadians last year, yet they have less restriction on how they can sell and market their products, but that also creates the opportunity, and I think the industry has sort of demonstrated that success doesn't come equally. Companies that are good at bringing products to market are good at working through the regulation, and also that regulation also is largely drives how you can communicate your value prop to the market and to consumers.
Absolutely, and I think the one thing is the opportunity there from the branding perspective is also that we're being cautious as a society bringing this to market. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. And I really loved your point. It's the opportunity that, within this very small framework, if you can stand out, that's a huge success. And that it's also what's inside, the beverage that will count the most. Chris, you had mentioned something about a dry versus wet beverage. I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit further to the audience.
Sure. So, there's two kinds of beverages. There's dry beverages and wet beverages. Wet beverages are the things you see on the table in front of us. But there's dry beverages. So a K-cup, a tea bag, Lipton's iced tea powders, Kool-Aid. They're all powders of some kind, or tea leaves, that are expected to be mixed by the consumer with water at the time of consumption. That's a dry beverage. And dry beverages are a huge product category. And because of what we were talking about earlier, cannabis is oil-based. It's a fat-based molecule. It is fundamentally different than wine or beer, which is a water-based. Alcohol is water-based. Your body has no problem absorbing water-based molecules. Think about vitamins. Vitamins A, D, E, and K. They're all fat-based vitamins, and they're very hard for your body to absorb. So typically, you're going to absorb 5% of what's in the bottle. Vitamin C, it's water-based. It goes into your bloodstream so easily. So dry beverages take advantage of the fact that you can mix a fat-soluble ingredient with a water at the last moment and then consume it. So I'm sure Paul would say the same thing. Dry-based beverages have shelf lives of 2 years, 3 years in a package. They last for a long time. They're incredibly light. They only weigh a gram or two. So you can ship thousands of servings across the country or across the world. You don't have to refrigerate them. They don't need any special handling. They're lightweight. And they are very enjoyable by the consumer because you can add them to any beverage that you like. So Lexaria has had this idea for a long time that, at least in the short term, and by short term I mean probably the next, 2 to 4 years, I think dry beverages are probably going to be an area of great success for the cannabis industry. They're very discreet. You can have them in your shirt pocket. You can put them into your Coca-Cola, your stadium beer, whatever you like. Whereas wet beverages, they're heavy. 6-pack weighs a lot more than a couple of grams. And they cost a lot more to manufacture. So I think there's two separate markets. I think there's going to be success in both, for sure. But I think as investors, you might want to consider the idea that there's opportunities in both. Certainly for us, we're also looking at the idea of using dry beverage formats for delivery of THC, separate, that's a different issue. CBD, big US market, Walmart, blah, blah, blah. Nicotine, another whole separate market. Oh, by the way, you will not get cancer from that. So dry beverages, I think, are a huge market, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. Paul?
I think it'll be really interesting to see sort of what forms of these 2.0 products really take hold as far as what consumers spend and purchase at point of retail. But I think The one point I would say is whether it's dry or wet beverages, this is a race right now, and the companies that win market share are going to be those that get products to market. We are very excited to work with these guys, BevCanna, because we think that they have a very unique asset, and that is a highly automated facility that can pump out 70 million bottles per year. And what we're very excited about is that we think they're going to be one of the first 2 or 3 in Canada that's going to actually have that license for large-scale commercial production. And I say this all the time. If you look back 5 years ago, there's a lot of companies that talk, but it's going to be the guys that win the market share in 2.0 are going to be those folks that can roll out, commercial scale and be able to actually supply this marketplace, which is going to be void of a lot of products for a variety of reasons, regulatory and a lack of supply being the biggest one. So that's what we're excited about, is sort of seeing kind of what formats and ultimately which technology is going to be the one that kind of wins at the end of the day.
The one thing I love about this sector that has really evolved over the past few years, because we've all been standing by watching it closely, is that there's not many sectors, especially just because everyone was out of the gate at the same time, where we're seeing companies, public companies, all work together. So as an investor, it's kind of a neat ecosystem, right? So if one company is doing well, it's because probably, the other company is doing well. It really is a neat opportunity that we're experiencing as investors right now. I think I'd probably like to finish off our chat with asking each of you, and Terry, I'll start with you. You've all been out there at some point raising capital. You've all been out there dealing with people interested in investing in the space. What has been your experience? And we've talked so much about the evolution of this since 2015. What's your experience right now in the market? Are investors interested in this part of the sector? Are they flooding to it? What's been your experience?
Well, I tend to find that there's not a lot in Canada of understanding of the CPG industry in this market. Canada's a mining, technology, banking, utilities kind of public market area. And cannabis, as much as it's a new area, this whole Cannabis 2.0 world is really core, traditional packaged goods, marketing, brand development. And so, we've seen a tremendous amount more interest now that we're getting closer to the launch date. When we first went down this path 2 years ago, people thought we were crazy to think that people would ever want to drink cannabis. But when we look at the research that's coming to us from legitimate sources like BDS and Nielsen that are doing really empirical research into the marketplace, you're looking at 30% to 50% of alcohol consumers looking for alternatives to alcohol, with the main reason being health. And so when you see cannabis coming in with no toxicity, up to 100% less calories per serving, because there are certainly intoxicating forms of cannabis that could have 0 calories in the product. No hangover, tons less calories, no toxicity, doesn't cause all kinds of disease. So it's the first time that you can really offer a vast swath of the population a really compelling alternative to alcohol, and alcohol is a $1 trillion global industry. So we have the opportunity to disrupt that, and I think if we apply the brand strategies and the solid go-to-market strategies with good, solid retail execution, because retail is everything for packaged goods. E-commerce is less than 5%, and will probably be that way for another decade. You're looking at the opportunity to apply all of these proven principles that we've been using in the packaged goods industry for years to create a whole new category that's going to have a hugely beneficial impact, I think, on our society. So,
Emma?
So I would say from an investment standpoint, what I found really to resonate is proven expertise and existing infrastructure. And I think that gives investors a lot of confidence in your ability to execute in what is a nascent category. Both those that have operated in regulated industries such as alcohol or nutraceuticals, and then infrastructure that's been bottling at either a national or exporting to a global scale. So I feel like that's been a really strong premise for BevCanna, and something that I'm really proud of to work with this team is resting on strengths and building into a space of opportunity. This is, as you mentioned, a disruptive category. There's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of patience that's going to be need to applied. So I think that's the huge piece for me, is the infrastructure and expertise.
I say this every single day to our team. We're witnessing history and we're making history, and we believe that the cannabis industry has the market potential to disrupt $500 billion a year of traditional CPG, tobacco, alcohol. Cannabis is the most widely used illicit drug globally, and Canada is the first G20 country to legalize it. So huge market opportunity. I think just like anything, raising capital and capital markets are feast and famine, good times and bad times. But I think companies that build true value will have no problem to find growth capital to scale their business.
So I think as investors, you better get used to the idea of being prepared to lose a lot of your money. Small companies, we're all small companies up here. We're the ones that are going to screw it up for the big guys. The big guys have been ignoring us for years. I've been talking to the LPs for years. They didn't care. They didn't care at all. I'm not going to name names, but I've talked to some of the big names repeatedly, and they told me that I was crazy, and that the only thing that mattered was that you're going to be selling flower. And in every legal market in the world for cannabis, the proportion of cannabis that's being sold as smokable flower is declining. People want alternatives to smoking, duh. So think about what CPG, consumer packaged goods companies, think about the big Canadian companies. Can't think of too many, actually, because most of them are American. So the Americans have been fantastic at branding CPG products for generations. And the Canadian LPs that think they are going to be instantly successful because they're good at growing a plant are deluding themselves. And as investors, if you think that just because somebody's growing plants really well, they know how to make a CPG product that's going to resonate with consumers, you're crazy. It's going to be somebody. I don't know if it's going to be us. I hope it will be. It might be Paul. It might be Emma. I don't know. It might be Terry. It might be somebody else. But it's going to be somebody who's disruptive and is doing it differently that it's going to change it. Because those guys have no idea, and they have never even been prepared for it. So CPG is not farming a plant. And I heard somebody, I was on a panel last week in Toronto, and I heard somebody say that, when we grow hemp outdoors, it costs me 3 pennies a square foot to grow hemp. And I can tell you that we've been buying CBD oil in the United States for 5 years. 5 years ago, I was spending $165,000 a kilo to buy legal CBD oil in the United States. In Canada today, it costs about $120,000 a kilo as an LP. In America, legal CBD oil today costs $6,000. And hot oil, which is illegal oil, costs $1,200 a kilo. So you tell me how a Canadian LP is going to make that work in a CPG product. It's not going to work. You're going to need disruptive technology that delivers cannabinoid ingredients more effectively than the LPs can. The LPs want to grow plants, and that's what they sold Bay Street, and that's what they sold Wall Street, and that's how they raised hundreds of millions of dollars. And that model is already broken. I spend a lot of time on Bay Street and a lot of time in Manhattan on Wall Street, and the financial door for growers is closed, locked, and the key is thrown away. There is no more money for growing, because growing is yesterday's deal. If you're going to make money in cannabis in 2020, it's going to be in one of these companies or somebody like us. It's going to be version 2.0.
And if I can just add one piece to that, just to provide some numbers around how true what Chris was saying actually is. Our cultivation facility has about 6,000 square feet of actual canopy for growing, actual growing room space. From that 6,000 square feet, we will produce enough THC for us to produce 113 million 10 milligram servings using Lexaria's technology. So your facility, scaled facility, will produce 70 million servings. So I can literally provide you with more than enough to do your facility and mine combined from my 6,000 square feet of growing space. Right? So these growing operations that have millions of square feet and are producing hundreds of thousands of kilos of oil to infuse into beverages and edibles, I sort of wonder, where the population is going to come from that's going to have to consume all of that, because it's going to be the small, super premium micro cultivators that, like us, that are producing enough to be able to feed the entire industry.
Thank you so much, guys. We're past our time here. I wanted to bring up this one story. It's a quick story. It's my favorite one. In 1886, Guinness Breweries went to go public, and they were raising £6 million in London. On that day, it was a Saturday, on that day, they literally had crowds filling the streets. Police had to come in, hold people back. People were wrapping subscription forms around rocks and throwing it through the window at Baron Edwards. By the end of the day, they had raised £120 million in 1886 for Guinness. And I think this is a really interesting topic that, we ask, where did alcohol go and the business grow from there? Well, it started there. And so I think there's some really fantastic opportunity in what all of you are doing. So thank you again so much for joining us. I think the event has come to a close today, and I believe the bar is open. And you've all been very patient. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.